Magic is found in every room, where people connect over a shared purpose. In this weekly podcast, Luke, Hannah and Chris explore the role of purpose, courage, mindset and culture in every leader's quest for transformational performance.
Hello and welcome to Magic in the Room. I am Chris Providence.
And I'm Luke Freeman. And today we are going to talk about trends in the workforce that we're seeing and that we think leaders should have top of mind and be grappling with a little bit. And we're doing this as part of our series on mindset. So if you remember mindset, there's a couple different dimensions. One is having a growth mindset versus a fixed mindset. The other is having an outward mindset versus an inward mindset. We have a free download this month around mindset to help you reflect on those things. You can find it at magicintheroom.com. And mindset is this month's focus, but our season's focus is on intentional leadership. And this season, we're talking about all the different aspects of being an intentional leader. And one of the big call outs is that leaders should be noticing things that are going on around them and then getting a really intentional approach to how they engage with those things that they notice. And so today, as we talk about trends, we're really exercising that.
Absolutely. And I think it's important to have the timing of this conversation is important, as a lot of people are looking at, what's next year's operating plan? What are some key strategies to put in place? Well, I think a lot of what we're talking about today is the work that may not be working. Like, what are we seeing out there that's creating constraints for business owners and operators that might need to elevate or emerge as top of mind conversations as we think about what to do here in fiscal year 24. It seems like our global conversations are really starting to circle or focus around 4 or 5 kind of different topics. Obviously the one that's on, I think, kind of the national dialogue is inflation and what that means, not, nationally, but what does that mean for our workforce? And then how does it play out within certain markets relative to maybe to housing and an ability to survive, within certain job roles. So, I think maybe let's scratch the surface there. Maybe what's your take on all of that? What has inflation really meant? And, ultimately, where's the buying power of the employee today?
Yeah. And I want to start really big picture and say that I think the kind of defining trend in the world of work, over kind of this 20-year period is a power shift where employees, team members, what they want and what their experience of work is becoming more important. I think the pandemic sped up several trends around that power shift from employer to employee. And we're going to talk about some of those other things as other trends as we go forward, things like less hireable people, right? People are, right now there's 2 open jobs for every job seeker. So there are still some things that are progressing that trend of that power shift. But I say all of that to say that I think inflation has thrown a bit of a speed bump on the path of that trending. And what we saw, a year ago before inflation was like really these heights of worker empowerment where there was that disparity between amount of available jobs and people shifting jobs. What I think was truer then than it is now a year later was that there were a lot of job options that provided like wage mobility and increased wages. And folks in general who were switching jobs were getting a 10, 15%, salary boost. That's not true now. Organizations haven't been able to keep up because of inflation with the demands that people have in increasing their wages. And even the organizations we work with that are working through, like, how do we do a cost of living update and how do we provide raises? They don't have the financial infrastructure or the profitability right now to make wage increases that actually meet like what inflation has done over this last year. So the worker has less buying power today than they did a year ago, even though they still have quite a bit of influence, and I think will continue to gain influence.
Yeah, I think you touched on something there, and so I've got two thoughts based on what you said. When we say COVID accelerated this trend, it what else did COVID do? It really forced people into more digital connectivity. I think that forges a more standard conversation, becoming almost like, and I would take this, it's like a digitized union of the workforce,
Mm-hmm.
where we're all seeing the conversation and we're starting to see what's possible. It's possible to remain working from home. It's possible to leave a place where I'm historically constrained due to resources and housing and go somewhere where I'm not constrained. So we've seen like massive growth in North Texas and here in Oklahoma, and in just places that have historically been more affordable have now a wild influx of people from places that have historically been less affordable. So the forging of that conversation and kind of the unionization of the workforce, because we're more focused on where that dialogue is taking place. It's not taking place across 200 different papers, right? Newspapers,
Right.
or thousands of coffee shops. So this is happening within 4 or 5 digital platforms that everyone is consuming. And I think that further fuels this trend of what you're talking about. Is why is that power shifting? And it's because whether we want to explicitly say it or not, the workforce is effectively unionized.
Yeah, and that's a great example of how the trends we're going to talk about today play together, because we'll talk about housing. I think aside from inflation, like housing and the housing trends in the US are the biggest kind of immediate short-term trend that leaders need to be thinking about. But it's a great example that like that trend in housing costs plus the digital trend plus people wanting more meaningful work and wanting the freedom to work from home, like it has created a huge amount of migration from the coasts to more affordable places to live, or places that are perceived as having a better worker experience, a place where you can, have a park out your back door, or go out and get on a trail, or have a body of water near you, or whatever it is. But where I'll disagree with you is while I think I understand the principle of like this digitized unionization, I think that's true for the upper middle class. I don't think in the classical sense of a union being kind of the voice for, the frontline workers, right. I don't think that's the case. And I think, the ability to work from home is really differentiated by someone's access to technology. And so I think we also are running the risk. Another trend here is that we're becoming a digitally informed or digitally competent versus digitally incompetent country and workforce. And that's typically a socioeconomic dividing line. And so if I have a smartphone, if I have access to a PC, if I have a place, here I am in, my little homegrown office in my backyard, like there are lots of homes and apartments where being able to log in and be on camera and have quiet in the background isn't possible. If I'm in a place where I have, multiple generations in an apartment, or some level of social instability, domestic violence, whatever else, childcare that I can't afford, right? It makes it very hard to participate in this opportunity that you just described. So I think as employers and as leaders, we need to think pretty hard about that, about who our jobs are designed for, and like what is our approach and what is our policy around a remote worker's workspace, and how tolerant or enabling can we be to allow someone the same opportunity to have better work-life balance and access to those jobs while they might be in a spot that makes it really hard to do remote work.
Yeah, absolutely. And okay, so I know that we hadn't really planned on getting at this topic this way, talking about digital competence versus physical competence, right? Now, we've typically been an economy that had a lot of physical competence. We can build the houses, we can remodel the homes, we can make the food, we can build the things. But what we're seeing is whether it's from immigration policies or um, just interest, general interest, and other population decline, like we're seeing population collapse in a number of verticals. So primarily, I'm speaking to your electricians, construction workers. I mean, for every 5 people out, there's one person in, and we have all these, you know, uh, really ready to retire founders that don't have anyone to take their business, and their business is naturally shrinking anyway because the number of people available to work within it just aren't there. So I kind of tie that back to like digital versus physical competence, tied back to who's looking out for the front line or creating gravity or a valuable employee experience, because what the market is saying is we're not transacting for that job. You can call me and say, hey, do you want to come frame houses? Hey, do you want to come make the food? Do you want to come, wire commercial buildings with me? Like, no, I will not transact for jobs that are only physically competent in a world that's moving towards digital competence being the aspirational goal. So we have this massive mismatch or misalignment between traditional operators and what the workforce is looking for. So how long do we just stare at this problem? We talk, and I think a lot of people will be talking about this as we move into 24. Like, if we're not taking one of just a few actions, it feels like we're staring at the problem.
Yeah. Yeah. And just to sum up what you said, in the trades, as boomers retire, there's no one to replace them. And this is going to be a huge gap in the coming years. I mean, it already is a gap. It's a gap for those founders, right? As you said, that they can't find workers to come in and backfill them. And so a lot of them are just, hey, I've got my savings socked away. I'll sell this business for pennies on the dollar because that's all I can get, because there's no one out there buying them up. And there are some, right? There are a few entrepreneurs who see this gap. So, but I'm just going to have to exit. And like, there's no one to fill that gap. So we're going to start feeling that as consumers, I think, pretty quickly, and more people will probably see the opportunity. But when I think about my 3 boys, when I say, what do you want to do? Like, none of them are saying anything about the trades, which is a little bit disappointing to me. Like, I think 1 out of the 3 going into a trade would make a ton of sense. But I think a lot of people are having the same experience that's happening in our household, where it's not aspirational. And I'll say a part of that is we don't see stories of those being incredible jobs. They're not publicized. They're not, there's not a job path that is intuitive to people. They don't understand the economic benefit. And I think in a social media world where we're only seeing the top 1% of income earners, lots of our kids today aren't seeing, hey, what's the 60th or 70th percentile of income earner? And I can have that career. And there's a really clear path to get there. All they're seeing is the 1% that the algorithm's feeding them. Like, oh, I want to be an influencer or a YouTuber. And I'm not saying being an influencer is bad. I'm just saying the likelihood of you succeeding at that is very, very low.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that's what's wild is, and I think this is where the education system probably breaks down and fails us a bit, is not only like as a tradesperson am I 70th percentile, but then the path to doing that as an entrepreneur could easily put me in the top 5%.
Right.
Right. And there's like we're not educating people around that fact.
Well, there's a challenge there and there's an opportunity there. Like the challenge is that people don't want to go work for an asshole. And I think that's that's the narrative right now. If someone says, "Hey, do you want to go be a plumber?" They're like, "Oh, and work for so and so? I know how that's going to go." No, I'm not willing to do that.
Right.
And so that narrative is the leading narrative. But that's an opportunity, right? If you can enter that space, become an owner, and build a progressive culture that provides franchising opportunity for your team members as they progress, provides scalable revenue, provides an ESOP program. Like there are a lot of things that could be done in that space that would change the trajectory and the narrative and kind of the pathway for people entering, who are interested in entering that space. And really the management and leadership training and organization design training that I think, like you said, if applied, there's just a ton of opportunity.
Yeah, you bet. Well, and you kind of take this idea, like as an operator or a business owner or someone responsible for building a team, identifying, hey, we have population collapse in job roles that don't require or that require physical competence over digital competence. But then if I have this layered effect of, housing just simply cannot be purchased for frontline wage in the area that I'm operating within. I was looking at the Seattle MSA, and in the Seattle MSA, Redfin's a great source, for a lot of awesome housing information. But last I looked, in the entire Seattle MSA, there was 120 single bedroom residences for rent. 120 in the entire MSA. Well, and guess what happens if it's larger than one bedroom? One person can't afford it. It's the whole system is working against the individual contributor. And heaven forbid, like if I am single and an individual contributor, there are just markets where I cannot afford to live. We have, markets where, employees live in the RV park, right? And because it is a feasible option when traditional housing doesn't exist.
Yeah.
And, there isn't a solve. These are market dynamics. The businesses can't just run out and pay everybody this wage that makes that affordable. Like it's a scaling and systems issue. There isn't enough inventory being built. There's a lot of not in my backyard around multifamily residential housing. And all these beliefs and conditions are coming together to create a massive storm for business owners and operators. And like, I know there's a lot of leaders out there looking at this problem for next year, but I don't know what to do about it.
Yeah. And as far as what to do about it, I mean, if you had the resource as a business and you have a high number of employees that kind of fit in this frontline, trade category, if you're not thinking about how do you own housing that becomes employee housing, like I think you're missing the boat. And we've talked about this quite a bit, but unfortunately the organization has to step in as an intermediary to acquire and manage housing that employees can afford, because there's no one else doing it. For the most part, local ordinances, state governments are not stepping in and ensuring that there's affordable housing for people. And so it's left to the organization, because they're the ones that hold the bag when there isn't affordable housing, right? When they can't fill a role, like they're the ones that suffer. And so the ones who are making this work have already bought or built apartment complexes or duplexes or something that's close to them, right? If you're in a hospitality area and it's a bunch of VRBOs that are, $2 million VRBOs all around you, and you're trying to run a electrical business and, service all of those $2 million homes, well, you're probably going to have to buy a few cabins or buy a house that turns into a multifamily unit for your team members. And that feels out of the box, but I will say for the clients who have taken that journey, what we see is like there are some ways if you get with your accountant that can be a pretty big tax advantage for you as an organization. And then obviously the stickiness of those roles that you offer goes up for sure. So your turnover decreases, and really the affinity for your business from those people who have been looking for affordable housing for a long time, for most of them, and they've seen the other options out there. And then you give them like a really workable solution. Like they love you for it.
Right. And what you're seeing there is this calling to organizations to be, and it's something we've talked about from the jump of this podcast. The calling is for organizations to moderate relationships and steward the quality of life for frontline, which kind of flies in the face of the industrialist hangover of we're the company, you're the person, you work for the company, you transact for the wage, you will always have a job and we will always make sure you have a check. So very different social contracts today between organizations and employees.
I just want to say though, like there's some irony there, because how did some of the largest, corporate projects get completed, right? How did the railroad get built? Like there was certainly employee mobility and housing included in the infrastructure plan for building the largest steel mills in America, getting the railroad done, all of those things. And was that problematic? Like, do we want to have slums of employee labor where it's, indentured service? Obviously, no. But what they at least recognized was that where the infrastructure doesn't exist for me to get work done, I have to build the infrastructure to be able to get this project done, to be able to fulfill my vision. And so at some point, we just got to lean into that, I think.
Man, that's an awesome call out. I love that, because as I'm going to frame myself in and paint a little picture for me, if as I was operating or as a business owner, how much of what I'm doing requires me to have a railhead, right? Am I driving forward? Am I needing people? Am I needing resource? Am I deploying? Am I developing? And if that's what I'm doing as an operator, I've got to have the people. I got to house them, feed them, steward them if I expect to have them along the journey with me. So I think that's a powerful analog to kind of what a lot of us are facing relative to those challenges. So, and we talked about that calling for organizations. We've talked about the impact of inflation, population collapse. Let's talk for a moment, like when we have this population collapse within verticals, what you've really shared with me is there's really two routes, in that you can choose to change the job design or you can work towards automation. So I just want you to take a few minutes to kind of share your thoughts on, hey, if you're in one of those industries where there seems to be population decline or collapse, what are those options that you can deploy?
Yeah, so let's take an example. Before we started recording, we were talking about a housekeeper at a hotel, and we're at a point with, like we talked about at the top of the episode, this power shift from the organization saying we've got all the jobs, you need us, to team members or employees saying you need people to get your work done, and I have two open jobs for every job seeker. Like we're at a point where it is very real for most operations that most folks don't want to go clean the same box 50 times a day. That's not a desirable job. And I get it. Like, I don't want to do that. So we've got a couple options. One is innovation automation. If you've got 50 boxes that need to be cleaned every day, are there things that we can do to make it where a human doesn't have to do all of that? Or it becomes a really efficient process. Or the other tool we can use is job design. And like, what is job design? Job design is just saying, what are the needs of every human being in the work that they have? And there's three. Most researchers would say that people need autonomy. So they need to have some sort of control over how they get done, what they're supposed to get done. They need to have meaningful relationships with others, which, hey, if I'm cleaning 50 boxes a day and for the most part, that's me in that box and all 50 of those by myself, and I'm only seeing someone in the back room as I clean out mops or whatever, like, hard to have meaningful relationship while I'm doing that. And then the third is progression. So I need to be able to be mastering something as I go. And so if you think about those three components, like, how does the job stack up in those three components? Are we allowing people to master and progress? So have mobility through the organization. Are we providing them with meaningful relationship? And a lot of our power there as organizations is with their supervisor. So does their supervisor create a team that encapsulates meaningful relationships? Do they facilitate meaningful relationships? And do they build meaningful relationships between them and their team members? And then autonomy, like, do people really have the tools and freedom to solve problems in real time? So when I think about that traditional housekeeping job, like, scores pretty low on all of those as it's designed. So how would we design it differently? And if I said after 6 months or a year of cleaning the boxes, you get to rotate through this other thing that's working you towards a certificate in hospitality administration, right? And I'm just totally making that up, and I'm not saying that's feasible for everyone, right? Does something like that provide progression or mastery, one of those three core needs? Okay, I probably can design something there. Now, how do I train my leaders in such a way that they're developing meaningful relationships? There's certainly answers there, right? That's what we do every day, is help people do that. And how do we let people solve problems in real time? What technology do we give them? What tools do they have? How does everyone, in effect, become their own supervisor to some degree in how jobs get done? So not all easy problems to solve. And there's a lot of positions. If you're a line cook, how do you solve those problems? It's a challenge.
I know I'm not going to put the right words to this because my mind is really spinning. Low jobs with low relatedness are really the leaders in population collapse.
Yeah.
And I love this idea of, hey, now I'm going to go all the way back to kind of European contact and first migration to say, there's this space, it's a whole new world. It's full of opportunity. We kind of conquer the frontiers. We grow industry. We, the idea of work and labor and job and income, and look at all of these things that are possible. It just is a natural maturation that, so once we understand that work is expected and most everyone can have employment or achieve employment, well, that's the threshold now, and we're continuing to elevate. What's on top? This is okay. Everyone assumes that employment is available and achievable. Okay, now what kind of employment? Well, meaningful employment, and that's where I'll give Dave Owens a lot of credit here. Like, we were having these conversations a decade ago about how jobs that lacked relatedness or meaning, like, I'm not part of something bigger, I don't have high quality relationships with the team, he's just like, they won't exist. And we had a lot of really engaged conversations about that, and it's exactly what's playing out. Like, if you can't take a repetitive job without relatedness and transition that design into something more meaningful, you will cease to have that employee. And what I love about it, like now the challenge is laid down to operators. Like it's time to separate the wheat from the chaff. You can do the job design and you can automate, or you can't. Like, do you have the vision, the kind of intestinal fortitude to go make these things happen? Or are you a figurehead? And that's the answer, that's the question that we get to answer next year. And I'm excited to see it play out.
Yeah. And I love the way that you line that out from a historical perspective. And what jumped out to me was just like growing up as a young leader, like every time I heard the news about the economy, like what's the leading metric that we're managing to? Like the unemployment number, right? Oh, unemployment is at 8.6%, right? Like that was just like top of every newscast, right? Well, now anyone who wants a job has a job for the most part, right? There's some regional factors and all that, but let's just generalize and say pretty much if you want a job, you can get a job. So does the unemployment metric help us? It's an old KPI.
Right.
And when do we move? And I don't know if this is the right one, right? Because we're kind of just pulling this, out of the air at the moment. But like, when does well-being or job satisfaction or whatever the right KPI is, when does that become the top of every newscast? I think that's what, if I'm a worker, right, or if I'm a leader that thinks about this stuff deeply, that's what I want to know. Like, how many people are satisfied with their jobs in the US? And if I was a national leader, like that's the metric I want, because that's what I want to be managing to. Now that unemployment is probably not the critical problem to solve in the next 50 years because of our population destruction, right? We have not produced the workers to meet the demands of our economy. So, okay, everyone has a job. All right, how many of those are jobs that provide well-being, job that provides satisfaction, jobs, or how about this, jobs that provide, a wage that keeps people out of poverty? Like those are probably the more important KPIs at this point.
Yeah, absolutely. And well, wouldn't it be something to wake up in the morning and say, well, this week's the jobs report is in, and here's the intent to stay rating.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
What percentage of workers, are not actively looking for other employment, and like making that known. But yeah, it's striking to me how many interdependent systems grow at variable rates and outstrip kind of the ability of their interdependencies to feed them. We talked about, like how housing just isn't being built right now. We talked about, this idea of industries growing. We'll take, hospitality as an industry. Like it has grown much faster than the resources required to support it. And then you have collapse challenges around trades, right? Where it's not necessarily the growth of, sites to be serviced. It's a move of the population desires of the workforce. So you continually to see trends of a particular part of an interdependent system outpacing the growth of its other parts. And, I just kind of would call that out as something that leaders can watch for. Stop.
Yeah. And I have a lot of grace for leaders who it feels like the primary challenge right now is getting butts in seats, where it's like, we don't have the people that we need, and let's get our recruiting game on, and like HR, get me the people I need, get them hired. Like that feels like the most critical task, but paradoxically, actually going to designing meaningful work is the thing that long-term is going to solve that problem, because there will be winners and losers here. Like the organizations who don't figure out how to provide meaningful work, especially in these frontline trade positions, like we've talked about, like they are going to always be understaffed. The restaurants that don't provide meaningful, helpful, positive relationship work environments will not be open for every meal that they want to be open for. They'll be open for lunches only. That's the reality. And so, who are you going to be? Are you going to be one of the organizations that you're open for every meal because you've got the people? Because why would they ever go work anywhere else? Or are you going to keep work in I'm going to call it like a 1994 job,
Yeah.
right? Keep the 1994 job design and always be struggling for the people. And it's hard.
Yeah.
Like, again, I've got a lot of grace because it's not zero cost to redesign a job. Right. Like, that's true as well.
Well, it's those understaffed companies will never be able to retain leadership because all the kind of work rolls onto the backs of the doers, which is all, why we have this, my take on why we have this broad sense of overwhelm, is like the doers just keep on taking more and more doing as we have the collapse of, frontline willingness to participate in jobs of without relatedness.
Yeah, and I just want to call back. There's a reason why we're doing this in the Mindset Month. So
right.
we have to believe as a leader that the way we've done things the last 10 or 20 years isn't the way we have to do it for the next 10 or 20, and that there are new ways of leading and designing work that we can learn and we can master and we can progress in as leaders. And yeah, that's a belief issue. That's a cognitive issue. And we need to be training ourselves to embrace those challenges. And it requires energy, and it's
right.
hard to keep shifting to new realities in the economy, whether that's a pandemic or something else.
Yeah. And I'll give my parting shot. This is absolutely everyone's problem. And I think there are certain subsegments of our economy or of our workforce that think, well, my responsibility is to offer the position and the financial compensation for people doing the task. I need to trade tasks for dollars. And you can certainly take that approach, and it will certainly harm your business. Like, it's not the world we live in today, in that it's observed over and over and over again. And the fact that we're still trying to witch the water and work against science makes no sense to me. So what happens when we can't staff our business? Well, we're not achieving the throughput that we need to achieve to be successful. Well, what happens then when we can't pay our commercial lease? Or what happens when commercial landholders can't garner or obtain enough income from the square footage that they have? Well, they default on their mortgage for that, or their bank note for the facility. Well, then what happens when a bank has multiple people default on their commercial bank notes at millions of dollars per? Well, the banks collapse. Well, then what happened when the banks collapse? And so this is why it is everyone's responsibility to steward kind of up and down the workforce based on job level, right? Can we just be human about it and say people that are worthy and deserving of stewardship, accept that responsibility and say that's what's best for the economy?
Yeah. And I think, you started a great transition there. So we've been talking about housing. We've been talking about worker shortage, this shift from employer power to employee power, housing a little bit. But I do think commercial real estate is a trend worth talking about. And for leaders, I think if you are in a building that's owned by commercial real estate, or you're already here. If you own commercial real estate, I'm sure you're already thinking about this every day, but we need to be thinking about the second and third order effects of really low occupancy rates and how long those are going to be sustained for. And so just a couple things that I think you might want to run numbers on if you're leasing space right now is what would it look like for your business if you could go to your landlord and purchase the space that you're in? So I think there's going to be openness to that for some landlords in the coming years. They are going to be in tight spots. And then I think the other thing is when we go back to employee housing, if you have a vision for creating employee housing and you're in a market that has really low commercial occupancy rates, are there things that you could be doing right now to lay the groundwork for that to be some sort of win-win? And that's just one small example of, there's going to be a whole class of commercial real estate investors, I think, in the next 20 years who experiment a lot and find a lot of success with repurposing commercial space, commercial office space in particular, for some other value added use. And so if your business is in any way adjacent to that, if your value proposition as a business is in any way adjacent to that opportunity, I think you should probably be thinking about it.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I just always appreciate the time to just sit down and say, okay, here's what we're seeing. How does this influence where we're headed? It feels like we have plenty of constraints to work against as we innovate and strategize into 2024. Just thank you. I appreciate the conversation. Thank you for your insight. And why don't we go ahead and sing this thing out?
Yeah, thanks so much. I mean, we could talk about this stuff all day. I think if you want to hear more from us, or if you have specific questions about trending that's impacting you as a leader, reach out to us. You can find us at purposeandperformancegroup.com. You can find us on LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, and Chris and I are both pretty easy to find on those platforms. So reach out if you have questions. Remember, you can download the mindset guide, reflection guide at magicintheroom.com. And Magic in the Room is hosted by Chris Province, Hannah Broderud, and me, Luke Freeman, produced by Ben West. Social media management by Emma Holland and Maggie King. Our theme music is by Evan Grimm. You can find his music on Apple Music. This episode was recorded online in Tulsa, Oklahoma, from all of our different homes. So thanks so much. And man, these trends are challenging. They're big. And so we really hope the best for you and your organization. Keep leaning into the challenges. Keep thinking hard about it. And if you want to get together and talk about it over drinks, shoot us a message. Have a good one.
Bye-bye.